The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Kia ora tātou and welcome to edition number 2 of Gone By Lunchtime. This is our difficult second album. I'm Toby Manhire, and joining me again in the Spinoff Space Age Britomart studio to talk politics are the dream team of Annabelle Lee, producer of the new TV3 Māori current affairs programme The Hui, which begins when, Annabelle?
April 10th.
April the 10th, on TV3. And joining us too is Ben Thomas of the mysterious political PR firm Exceltium. Is it mysterious, Ben, more in a kind of House of Cards Series 1 or Series 2 way?
More like a Veep outtakes reel.
Veep out. Yeah, don't get me started on that. Didn't we once come to blows when I made a suggestion that you might be a bit like Jonah off Veep?
Completely outrageous.
Okay.
I spent my entire time in Wellington as Mike.
Mike. He's the one with the ginger beard.
The one who was always like caught out trying to find finger food at political rallies when things turn to custard.
We've got lots to get through today. We're going to cover a bit of gangs, a bit of Pharmac, a bit of flag, and a bit of Auckland madness. But first of all, Annabelle, you've just returned from the tangi for the great New Zealand activist and writer Ranginui Walker, who died this week at the age of 83. How was it?
It was good. He'd probably describe himself as an academic more than an activist. Although of course he was. It's a beautiful tangi. It's up at Orake Marae. He's from Opotiki, but being the modern Māori man that he is, has chosen to have his tangi in Auckland. So as people have come up and joined, huge crowds up there so far. I saw the first ope that went on this morning was like, Ben, you'd have loved it. There was Hone Harawira, Winston Peters, Shane Jones, every Māori and their dog and their political agenda sitting on their shoulder. And the ope that I went on with this afternoon included the Māori King, so some incredible oratory, some incredible mihi to him. He was a magnificent man, and his death reminds me a lot of the death of Michael King in 2004. Such an unfortunate time for him to have died. He died 2 days after Māori television launched and just before the foreshore and seabed stuff really blew up. And to have had Michael King's voice during that time, I think, would have really gone a long way to soothing relationships between Māori and Pākehā at that time. And that's something that Ranginui's done. So to lose him now is a big loss, not just for Māori, but for all of Aotearoa.
Yeah, I remember as a teenager reading Ka Whawhai Tonu Mātou, Struggle Without End, and just finding that a really eye-opening sort of experience as a read. It was an incredible kind of crystallisation of, I suppose, Māori experience in the interface with Pākehā. That's
right, and very simply written too. Like he wasn't he wasn't a flashy writer. He it very much was a reflection of him, very pragmatic, very clear thinking, but nonetheless compelling, and a great book that all New Zealanders should read. I think if everyone read that book, we'd all be better treaty partners to one another.
Thanks, Annabelle. Let's razz through a few of the political stories of the week. Judith Collins is never far from the headlines, and she popped up this week with some announcements on gangs, Ben, including a report finding that, quote, violence within gang families will cost New Zealand's welfare system $714 million over their lifetimes. And there was a launch of a new gang intelligence centre, and Judith Collins spoke about gangs selling methamphetamine to middle-class children, God forbid.
Yeah, I think the idea about sort of gangs in leafy suburbs dealing the pea trade in decile 10 schools is maybe a bit of a red herring here. The real focus on this is actually it seems to be the damage that gangs inflict on their families and on related people, especially in terms of the impact of domestic violence, in terms of the impact into lowered expectations, intergenerational welfare dependency, those kinds of things. Just having a read through the material that's been released, it strikes me as kind of thematically similar to a few other initiatives that this government's taken. Actually, I immediately thought almost sort of whānau ora for gangs, in the sense that it's about collecting more intelligence, on particular families, not sort of trying to do broad brush policy prescriptions and hope that you kind of drift net up the problems that you're trying to solve, but actually realizing that there is the information out there to actually identify the families that are sort of riven with domestic violence, with crime issues, and addressing those in a really kind of hands-on way, just as whānau ora does. By getting into the communities, talking to service providers, and identifying the people that are most at risk.
I could be wrong, but I imagine Judith Collins would be horrified at the idea of whānau ora for gangs being the headline. Isn't it about isn't this seemed to me to be out of the populist politics handbook? It's a bit, they crack down on gangs as the headline they want rather than helping out gangs, isn't it?
Well, they're helping out. I think the idea is that they're helping out what they see as the main victims of gangs, which is actually the people closest to gang
the families
members.
Of gangs.
Yeah, and also people who are brought into gangs and brought into a life of crime, a life of recidivism, and addressing those problems at the root, which actually does come back down to Bill English's investment model. Spending money at the beginning stage of the lifetime of what they might call a social problem or a social expense, which has actually ruined human lives.
What do you reckon, Annabelle? Do you feel kind of optimistic about an initiative like this, or sceptical?
Well, I think anything that deals with family violence is a good thing. It's certainly something that's wanted by Te Ao Māori. In 2014, when Māori television did a poll of all of the Māori electorates, the most important issue as voted in every Māori electorate, or as identified in every Māori electorate, was family violence. I'm not sure that this is what's going to be the thing that addresses it. I just wonder why it is that there's a specific focus on gangs and family violence rather than just family violence in general. And I wonder too, is this being driven by police, or is this coming from grassroots social services that actually work with these whānau and understand what the issues are, or is this something that's coming from above? Because if it is, then I don't think it's going to have much traction. But the other thing is, it's sort of curious, the relationship that New Zealanders have with gangs. Like, as you say, when it's posed as rich white kids getting sold pea, everyone's horrified. But when Millie Holmes's boyfriend is murdered, suddenly the New Zealand media are just fawning all over the headhunters, and it's just non-stop.
There is an unfortunate romanticism, I think, around gangs, and a lot of the academic literature, I think, doesn't really help with this. We hear a lot about how gangs are a substitute for family, they're a substitute for social institutions that might have broken down in some communities, but that really does skirt around the idea that they are nonetheless organisations set up for committing crimes. You could say that a cult is a family substitute. You could say that a terrorist organisation serves as a family substitute. And I find that rhetoric a little unconvincing.
Of course, there are some gang representatives who make the case that criminality is not synonymous with gang culture, and that there are differences to be drawn there. Let's move on to Pharmac. We've had that debate rear its head again this week, with a petition arriving at Parliament with 11,000 signatures on it, calling for the drug Keytruda, which sounds to me like a conspiracy theory of some sort, but is in fact a melanoma drug that is not funded currently on Pharmac, and that a number of people really quite passionately and sometimes quite heartrendingly calling for. Ben, you're quite hot on this subject. It is a tricky one because one doesn't want to be cold about these people who have very real experiences, and yet the Pharmac model is such that it should somehow, I guess, be kind of impervious to that emotional wave.
The Pharmac model is world leading. So what it does is Pharmac is the monopsony, the single purchaser of pharmaceuticals in New Zealand for the public health system. So it can use that position to drive down the price of drugs, to negotiate better options, and get the most out of what is a limited health budget. And budget for pharmaceuticals. And now it's important to note that the limited funding is a feature, not a bug. Pharmac is always going to have limited funding because the demands on the public health system are limitless. If you didn't have a limited funding model, you wouldn't actually have Pharmac. You'd have a kind of mythical horn of plenty, just kind of spewing drugs onto the street for free. And what that means is that there are significant clinical choices that have to be made, balancing efficacy, the health outcomes versus the cost. And Keytruda failed on those measures. It couldn't be funded.
That said, it is available in other countries, and there's no appeals process for Pharmac.
One of the most interesting things about this, which I find most politically abhorrent, is the just gross hypocrisy that the Labour Party has shown on this. The Labour Party campaigned against the Trans-Pacific Partnership on the basis that it would undermine the Pharmac model. Now, actually, Tim Grosser stood up to our major trading partners, got a specific carve-out for Pharmac, and the Labour Party seems to have forgotten its fierce advocacy on that case, and now actually is going to the wall to undermine the Pharmac model itself by special pleading for Keytruda, based on what has been a good public relations campaign by the pharmaceutical company, which flew two of the patients down to Wellington to present the petition, but the hypocrisy is just enormous. Well, one interesting thing is that under the Trans-Pacific Partnership, there actually will be an appeals process, which will provide even more transparency for Pharmac's funding. The difference is that the appeals process will again be conducted by clinical experts, and it won't be conducted by John Campbell on Radio New Zealand, and it won't be conducted by Annette King in Parliament.
Annabelle, what do you think? I mean, on one level, without that appeals process as it stands, democracy is such that it is every person's right to appeal to the ultimate power brokers, the sovereigns, which are MPs. Why shouldn't they? What's wrong with that? Do you think politicians should stay out of it, or have they got a role?
I heard someone say something interesting to me today, and that was, given that we know that the flag referendum is going to fail and that we're going to end up with the same flag, why not stop now, throw it out, and use whatever money is left over to buy the melanoma?
Yeah.
But the objection to that is that Keytruda is almost certainly not the first cab off the rank if Pharmac gets more funding. So what we're seeing with these high-profile PR campaigns and political campaigns by Labour is a situation that's basically the same as the beach down in Abel Tasman, where we're looking to crowdsource expert judgments, and we're going, because the thing is that we never hear from the competing claims on that money, people who could be saved by some heart medication, the public health experts who would prefer that money was spent on a supply of extremely large hats and sunscreen to combat melanoma, which may actually be a better use of public funds.
In terms of the political element, I mean, they kind of can't help it, can they? I mean, and the arguments are made that it's not about a drug particularly, it's about the size of a budget and it's about processes, but National too, with the same in opposition, specifically around, was it Herceptin?
Herceptin,
and Jonathan Coleman, the now health minister, I think this week quietly acknowledged that in opposition they had behaved badly by making a political issue out of it.
Yeah, that's right, and I think as the Dim Post blog pointed out, this is the problem when you start messing with conventions, is that it does weaken the moral high ground when you're trying to blast the opposition for doing the same thing. But that shouldn't take off. This isn't a he said, she said thing. This is about a model that works versus completely undermining that model.
Annabelle, you mentioned the flag, and it's quite right that we should move on to the great political issue of our age.
Let's get to the important stuff.
The voting papers, as we speak, are being distributed by the armies of New Zealand Post.
That'll keep them ticking over for another year.
And so they'll arrive sometime on alternate days. We are being asked in the second part of the referendum, and we're being asked to choose between the existing historical abomination and an alternative abomination, he said, editorialising slightly. We don't have the A-list vexillologists Dan Carter and Richie McCaw in the studio, but we do have Annabelle and Ben. And so I'm curious, you guys, what's your view of the whole business, and do you have can you tell us which box to tick?
I don't like either of them, to be honest. The old one or the new one. The new one's horrendous. It looks like a logo or a brand or something. And for me, and I wrote a column about this for the Metro, I don't really care too much one way or the other which one our flag is. I don't buy into the whole thing of, our men fought under that flag and whatnot. But yeah, they fought under that flag so that, rangatahi could have the freedom to make their own choices, and that's, and if they choose another flag, that's fine. My thing is that the flag that I love is the Tino Rangatiratanga flag, the Māori flag, and I'd like to see that flag fly alongside whichever flag you guys pick. I think that it's a beautiful symbol of nationhood to see the two flying alongside each other. A lot of people say that they don't like the Union Jack on our flag. I actually do, because I think it's a reminder that, we were a country that was colonised, and the hardship and the mamae that had for the Indigenous people. I think it's an important reminder of that. Other people hate it, but my thing is, I'm not that fussed, but can we perhaps have a conversation about representing the Māori flag alongside whichever flag the rest of New Zealand wants?
Yeah, we've got more than one official language, so you're saying, can we have more than one official flag?
Why not?
Yeah. Because the interesting thing, it seemed to me at one point that not having the Tino Rangatiratanga flag in the group voided the whole process from the start. But then, talking to some people, which hadn't occurred to me, talking to some Māori people who explained that to use that flag as the national flag would be unacceptable, because it would imply an acceptance of sovereignty that didn't exist.
I thought that was a number of my sort of hand-wringing liberal friends suggested, why don't we have the Tino Rangatiratanga flag in the referendum? I was like, it really is a bit of colonial overreach to sort of say, well, we really like the design on your multi-sovereignty flag.
Can we have that one?
Perhaps we could have that too, according to the polling, the terrible old flag will beat the terrible new flag in a cakewalk.
Do you like the new flag? Do you think it looks good? Be honest.
I saw both of them flying off the harbour bridge, and they both looked either fine or terrible, depending on whether you wanted to look at them as works of art or something fluttering off a bridge. One of the most I thought buoying things that I found when this whole debate began was that I didn't really know what our flag looked like, it turned out. I was a bit iffy about the colour of the stars. I didn't really know how that Union Jack kind of sorted out with the red lines inside the white lines.
Come on.
And I'm hoping to achieve a similar level of ignorance about sort of 2 weeks after the referendum, whichever flag wins.
The process, though, has been quite astonishing in that I don't know whether how much of it's been politicised or not, but now you've got people accusing other people of politicising it, which in itself seems to politicise it, and it's become this sort of weird proxy argument for all sorts of other things, and you have these strange bedfellows. I think you've got Cameron Slater and Bomber Bradbury marching in step to retain the old flag. It's sort of weird, isn't it, Annabelle, the way it's...
because I remember sort of back in the early 2000s, John Campbell was sort of running a campaign to change the flag, and we were into it, and we were loving it. All of New Zealand, we were like, yes, let's change the flag. We wanted change, and it was a big discussion point, and everybody was sort of wondering, when is this going to happen? We'll be all for it. And then, of course, when Key rolled it out, people sort of saw it for the political distraction that it was, and now everyone's like, no, I like the flag that we've got. So it's quite interesting the way the national mood has changed around it, and I think people see it for what it is essentially, which is a distraction away from some more pressing issues that people want dealt with.
I think there is an argument that, you've really got to choose your moment for it.
Yes.
Perhaps, around 2011 when the Rugby World Cup was here and we had won, quite aside from the fact that Silver Fern would have, won with about 90% of the votes, there was a kind of mood. Controversially enough, I think, either the election of the John Key National Government in 2008 or the election of the Clark Labour Government in 1999, both really seem to kind of suggest a changing of the national mood. But I just don't think we've got that kind of turning point right now that sort of is kind of driving people to any kind of, sense that New Zealand, tomorrow will be any different from New Zealand today.
And isn't that partly because the debate has expressly avoided discussing any constitutional stuff? It's been write down what New Zealand stands for on a piece of A4 and take a photo of yourself, whatever. And it seemed, and it's, I've been trying to work out why it's become, there's been quite a kind of unpleasantness that's been involved in lots of the argument. And I sort of wonder whether that's in part because none of the actual fundamental stuff, it's a bit like a big family argument where no one is really discussing the essential structures that mean that the family is dysfunctional. It's like, it's sort of just got a bit like, I've sort of, after an unpleasant experience with a red peak thing, no, it was a fun experience as a red peak advocate, I've sort of just generally found that do people have to be so vile? Have people been vile, or am I being a sensitive flower?
The thing is, it really, the smaller the stakes, the more invested people get,
Right.
and there's sort of organizational theory about this. Nobody really understands a $1 billion funding decision, but everyone understands spending, $100 or $120 on a new coffee machine. And once you get down to sort of like looking at sort of 3 to 4 colors on a rectangle, that's when humanity shows its true spirit. Like, just the arguments have been so ridiculously trivial. This kind of idea that I think there is an unfortunate strain of elitism in a lot of it. I think that people with bachelors of arts and people who work in advertising agencies really get on board with the idea that the silver fern, probably the most recognisable symbol of New Zealand that still survives outside our current flag, is just some kind of a logo or beach towel, whereas a red triangle somehow encapsulates the spirit of 21st century New Zealand.
If the silver fern, if just the plain silver fern was one of the options, I would vote for
I like that too. I'd vote for that too in a heartbeat. And it's ISIS that are to blame for that, aren't they? Because the Prime Minister made it clear that wasn't
No,
I don't think so. I think the Prime Minister pretty much ruled it out as soon as someone raised the possibility that it could be mistaken for an ISIS flag. It was just, nope, we cannot be going down that road.
Such downers.
I know, they keep ruining everything, don't they? They're haters.
They're haters and wreckers.
Speaking of haters and wreckers, let's talk about Auckland quickly, which is sort of an even bigger omni-shambles than the flag debate, really. On Wednesday last week, there was that epic meeting, which you can watch an account of on the Spinoff, that Hayden Donnell, is it Hayden Donnell or Hayden Donnell? Donnell, yeah, I like that, Donnell. Yeah. He's done quite a good video raging at the meeting, which you should see. But in any case, they took submissions and talked for over 6 hours on this question of the submissions to the independent board that is going to decide on the unitary plan, which is the Auckland plan that decides how the city will cope with a growing population. It's growing pretty rapidly, whether it would go up or sideways or how much of each. And it's kind of convoluted, but late in the piece, a subcommittee, having learned that they had massively undercounted the number of people that were going to need to be housed, made some changes in some quote-unquote leafy suburbs, those same places that children are being dealt pee, no doubt. And they didn't consult with the residents, with the homeowners, and the homeowners got out their pitchforks, quite understandably to some extent, turned up at this meeting and got very angry. And it became a debate, they said, about process, but kind of underlying that was a debate about whether the density in the city should be going more up or more sideways, or I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Ben? How did you read all of it?
Well, again, talking about the, I think there's an optimal size for democracy, and it's a little larger than local government. You hear these sort of stories about bus shelters moving sort of 300 metres up and down a suburban road as each person in turn complains about it being erected outside their house. And the thing is that the number of votes is so relatively small in local government that you actually get ridiculous decisions being made by a vocal and underrepresented minority, by which, of course, I mean the baby boom generation. I saw a preview of Auckland's oncoming housing catastrophe when I was working down in Wellington, and there was a proposal to increase the ACC levies on motorcycles, and thousands of weekend warrior sort of dentists, plumbers, late 50s and 60-year-olds in their leathers turned up outside Parliament to protest, and there was a subsequent back down by the government. And I think that was a real example. That was the first point at which the baby boomers really drew a line in the sand and made it clear that they weren't going to accept the consequences of any of their behaviour or actions throughout their lives.
Wow, that's pretty bold. But just bringing you back to that council room on Wednesday, whatever you think of some of the vociferous response, those people quite reasonably said, "Screw you, we haven't been consulted, you can't just sneak this through, we're not having it." It's fair enough, isn't it?
I think the scale of the proposed changes was much less than was suggested in the mainstream media, I think. The other thing is, as somebody of the sort of centre-right persuasion, I do believe in property rights. I believe that there should probably be as few constraints on how you use your property as possible, and I think particularly where there's a squeeze on housing and a kind of population crunch hitting Auckland, that there's less reason than ever to constrain those choices.
What do you reckon, Annabelle? There's been this intergenerational warfare meme thrown around that this represents the kind of coming battle in Auckland. What do you make of all that?
I saw our Filipina just before, actually, at Ranginui Walker's tangi, and he said the thing that stood out. I haven't actually watched the video, I've heard about it, but he said the way the young people in the room were treated was absolutely appalling, and he's never seen anything like it, and he thought it was disgusting, and he felt ashamed of the way they were treated. They were literally screamed down and barked at and belittled, and it's great for democracy that the baby boomers weren't adequately consulted and they got to come in and throw their toys and the council back down. But how are we supposed to engage young people in democracy, let alone future home ownership, if they're getting berated at the council like that? I think it's really unfortunate and should have been handled much better.
There was a fascinating statistic I saw recently, and I wish I could remember precisely what it was, but basically I think if you're over the age of 65 in Auckland, you're almost 3 times more likely to vote than someone between the ages of 18 and 25 or something.
The turnout in the super city elections and in the different cities in Auckland prior to the super city is, it sits around sort of late 30s, mid 40%. And there is a democratic gap there.
They need to go and vote. They need to get in voting, these young people.
I guess they just feel so dislocated from what's going on, and that why would they bother? And then you have these ones that have turned up to this hui to voice their concerns, and these are people who obviously are politically engaged and care and want to get involved, and they just get treated like so horrendously that if you're a young person and you happen upon that video on Facebook or YouTube, it's hardly going to encourage you to get involved in local body politics, let alone get out and vote.
Yeah, that's an interesting window into the council. I think they're used to not being heavily scrutinised, and quite a few people who watched that video run in terror looking at some of the councillors. Anyway, let's move on to the other, even more farcical, potentially, element about Auckland local body politics, which is John Palino, who you may remember from the last election when he stood as the main centre-right candidate against Len Brown. He got 100 and a little bit thousand votes, did all right. And then in the days immediately following Len Brown's return to office, suddenly we had this incredible story break about Len Brown and his affair with Bevan Chuang, who it turned out had also been doing a little bit of work for the Palino campaign. And Palino got caught up in all of that while denying that he was part of the story breaking. And so then he disappeared, and suddenly he's back and he's standing again, despite there already being a apparent placeholder for the centre-right Victoria
He's been in Connecticut doing business.
And
Takanini doing business.
But he was back this week.
Global enterprise.
What I want to know is, when is he setting up his Chinese restaurant with Bevan? With Bevan, because that's what the meeting was about. And I'm like, I want to go to that restaurant.
There was a meeting in a car park, apparently, wasn't there?
Is it Yum Cha? I love Yum Cha.
So he was asked by Todd Nile of Radio New Zealand after his mayoral launch at his restaurant in a garden centre in South Auckland.
The farmer's friend, Takanini.
He was asked why he went AWOL immediately after the last election, and this is what he said.
I sent out a press release. If the media is not interested in that press release, I'm sorry. I am not going to enter someone else's dogfight just to please the media. The public knew I had nothing to do with it. You have two people there. You have the mayor and you have his mistress. I'm not part of it. It wasn't me who actually was found with my pants down in Ngāti Whātua room.
I mainly played that clip because I really like hearing John Palino say dogfight.
With a W-A-D-A-W-G.
I think we need more people saying dogfight in our politics. But what do you reckon, Annabelle? I mean, this campaign now it was looking fairly stale. Phil Goff, acceptable candidate to everyone. Then Victoria Crone appeared, the former Xero senior manager. And now we've got John Palino.
He does know it's local body government, hey? Does he know what local body government is in New Zealand? It's not like New York City.
It's the mayor.
Does he know?
He's going to be the mayor.
He's going to be the mayor.
Dogfight.
I'm just shocked that anyone would care about local body politics that much, that someone would be that desperate to be the mayor of Auckland.
How do you see it, Ben? I mean, because the other part of this, of course, is that his campaign manager is Simon Lusk, who's one of the main dramatis personae of dirty politics. Cameron Slater is involved, although not very much apparently, but he set up an interview with the Sunday Star Times. They've got the old band back together, and John Palino doesn't know what's going on. Carrot Graham is managing.
I saw that.
Yeah, look, and that attracted a lot of attention. There was there was a bit of sneering, I think, about Palino's launch.
Yes, there was some sneering.
There was some unflattering coverage. At the same time, look, what have Lusk, Graham, and perhaps Slater done? Especially in the Super City, name recognition is probably 75 to 80% of the battle in local government, and people are certainly talking about Palino. Now, whether that will translate into 110,000 votes again is sort of remains to be seen. But I wouldn't like to second guess Carrot Graham, who I guess is a competitor in the space I work in. A lot of the time you don't understand the sort of method to the madness initially.
The thing is, they're talking about...
You do later on? Or
I'm saying sometimes that happens.
They're talking about John Palino losing his shit at his own campaign launch over, a couple, dude, calm down.
I guess on the other hand,
it's the start of the it hasn't even got hard yet.
He got TV coverage, probably much TV coverage as Phil Goff got for his campaign.
It was certainly the most high-profile launch, of any of the major candidates. Mark Thomas's launch, I think, was a bit sort of anonymous. He Victoria Crone's launch was a bit rushed because, of course, as the head of a publicly listed company, there's all sorts of issues about sort of disclosing to the market essentially as soon as you're kind of thinking about running. So
I'm not buying the whole all publicity is good publicity line on that. He looks like a dick. You are not Rudolph Giuliani. Calm down. It's Auckland City. You're going to be moving bus stops up and down the road by 300 metres. It's not worth getting that worked up about. Somebody needs to be taken care of in the Ngāti Whātua room, I think.
When you say taken care of...
You know what I mean, Toby.
I think that's probably the best place to leave it on that highbrow note. This has been Gone By Lunchtime, the Spinoff Politics podcast. Thank you very much to Ben Thomas and to Annabelle Lee for joining us, and to Jose Barbosa, who is our producer. And we'll be back again before long, I think, and we'd like to just say goodbye by playing John Palino say dog fight several times.
Dog fight, dog fight, dog fight, dog fight.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.